All right.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Hey, what's up?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Looks like you're the only one here so far.
Yeah,
Well, I'll just get started then. So, last time I went over subdivision modifier and a lot of other modifiers, and it seems to be a bit confusing the way I explained it, so I'm just gonna try to explain it in a different way. So, I have the axe here that I did from week one, and I'm just gonna duplicate it with Shift D and move it over on the x-axis. So right now, this is shaded flat. So you can see all the lines where you have them, all the edges, right? So what a subdivision modifier does is it smooths it out so that you don't have these anymore, or at least you start to get rid of them, right? Because it pretty much averages between every edge and vertice and makes it smoother. So I'll just add a subdivision surface here. And you can see as soon as you add it, you kind of have your shape kind of just changes completely, right? So what you want to do is analyze where there are sharp edges on your mesh. So you can see here is a sharp edge, here is where you want a sharp edge, just pretty much around the perimeter of your shape, right? So when you add the subdivision modifier, you want to go into edit mode and then with Control R, add edge loops to closest to where you want that sharp edge, right? So now you can see this top part here is sharper than this bottom part as it should be. Let me hide this mesh real quick. So let me undo that. So you see how I added an edge loop here? It's because so that when the subdivision modifier is active, it makes the averaging wherever is closer sharper. So you can see if I dissolve this edge, add the subdivision modifier, and then re-add the edge loop, you can see where it becomes sharper where you want it, right? So you just want to add edge loops wherever you want the sharps to go. And now you can compare it to this one and you can see it's a lot smoother than this one, especially in the front side, right? So say you want this back part to not be as round and kind of follow the same flatness on the back, just add another subdivision or edge loop here and you've sharpened it, right? And now you can shade smooth and you'll see it's a lot smoother. And then if you go over here, you can play around with this and make it, as smooth as you want. And you see if there's a still sharp lines, you can bump up the subdivision. Let's turn this off real quick. Yeah, just so bumping up the subdivision adds more geometry, but it smooths it out even more. Um, you don't necessarily need to do that, so there's just a weird shading error right there that was giving me that sharp edge, but this looks pretty good, right? This is like the high quality version of this, right? This is your basic block out. When you do the subdivision, you make it smooth as it would be in real life. So let me bring back, let's see, oh, bring this back. And now we can do the same for this one. So let's hide this X head and let's do subdivision modifier. And now we're going to add some edge loops where we want it to be sharp. And you can also, you see at this top face where it doesn't have, um, you can't really add an edge loop on top. What you want to do is go into face selection while you're in edit mode with 3, select the face, and then press I for inset. So now you've kind of added an extra edge loop on a cylinder or on a face so that you can get this both. So this is the sharp edge you want. Now you have one on the outside and on the outside and on the inside, right? So now it'll average out to be a sharp edge or somewhat sharp edge right around the top, right? And so here I also want another sharp edge, right? I don't want it to just kind of curve downward. I want the break here because the reference image has this line across, right? So I want to keep that line there So what I can do is just add edge loops on the outside and inside of this. Bring it as close as you want. Double tap G to slide edge loops, and now you have that sharp line across. All right, and then the rest of it, it looks pretty good. At the bottom here, you have a bit of stretching here, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the top. You want to select the face and then press I for inset, and that looks pretty good. Now you can shade smooth, and it'll look pretty good all across the entire mesh, right? So this is what subdivision is for. It makes it smooth, it averages it out so that anytime you have these really sharp edges, you can kind of give it a beveled, smoother look, right? This is how objects are in real life. In real life, there's no objects that are sharp like this, right? Manufacturing and like production never has a perfectly sharp edge. You want to keep that kind of smoothness across the top. Maybe this is a little too smooth now that I'm looking at it. So what I want to do is add an edge loop across the top as well. Let's see. And it'll be easier if you turn off the modifier for the viewport. So remember last week I discussed these buttons. This is render, viewport, and then in edit mode, right? So if you turn off in the viewport, you can kind of see it more easily. And now we have the shape that's kind of following this, but smooth, right? Okay, so this week I was actually going to discuss UVs. So what is a UV? So UV is taking a 3D object and flattening it, right? So this is arguably the hardest part of 3D modeling, right? So the purpose of UVs is so that you cut up your 3D object so that it can be flat and you can put a texture on it. And once you kind of put the texture on it, when it wraps back around, it holds the texture you want. So what does that mean? So imagine wrapping paper, right? Whenever you wrap the object, right, you kind of have to follow the edges of the box and make sure that your wrapping job fits the box perfectly, right? So I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about, right? So here we have this mesh, right? If I were to put a texture on it right now, so I already, let's see if I put the texture on it, right? So I put a checker pattern on here, right? As like wrapping paper, right? These squares should evenly wrap around the entire object. You can see it's kind of doing it right now, but it's kind of distorted a little bit, and then here it's just completely like wrong, right? So the process of unwrapping and the theory behind it is probably the most complicated part of 3D modeling and texturing, right? So I think the easiest way for you to understand it is anytime there's a sharp edge that you want to put a UV seam. So a UV seam breaks up your object into a flat piece, right? So up here you see where it says UV editing on your tabs here, right? So you want to click into UV editing, and now you see this grid. So this grid is where your texture is going to go, right? So your entire texture is going to fit into this box, right? And however, how much you can fit in this box depends on how big your object is and how big your texture is, right? So, not that important right now. I'll just discuss the theories of UV, right? So right now if I hit tab and I select these faces, you can see it's showing up on this grid, right? And if I hit A, this is how it has by default broken up this model, right? So we started with the cube, so it's kept this cubic form, right? So if I were to import a cube right now, and then I go into its UVs, this is what a dissected cube is, right? So this is the bottom face, right? You can see, or okay, so they set it up a little differently, but you can see where the cube kind of unwraps. If these two sides came up, it would be uh, like these two sides, right? And then you can follow along the faces and you can see where each face has its own dedicated square because you're kind of just taking this face and slapping it onto this grid, right? So if I were to, let's see, let me just link the materials. And so you can see that this cube, it unwraps really well, right? All the squares are not distorting. They're all meeting at the edge. It's just a cube, right? So you can also go here and look at your texture, right? So up here, you have a few different options, but right here is where you can look at different textures, right? So to match up your UVs with the texture, right? So if I move this around, you can see that it starts shifting on the actual object. If I scale it, it makes the cube smaller or bigger, right? So you see, if this square is smaller now, then more of the texture is kind of in the box, right? Or at least the squares are going to be bigger because you're making the actual face smaller. All this might be a little hard to grasp right now, but eventually when you do it yourself, it'll kind of make a little more sense. So if this is how it is by default, make it, um, how do we put in UVs, right? How do we decide to cut it where we want it, right? So we're gonna go back into solid mode and I'm gonna go into edit mode with tab, right? Let's see. So let me turn this off real quick. Let's see. All right, there we go. So right now I'm looking at my mesh and I know that this right here, this whole front face is where I want to make a cut. Um, and I want this face to have us one flat plane texture here. So I'm going to go into edge selection mode. I'm going to hit 2 for edge selection, right? So right here, my edge selection is selected and I'm going to hold Alt. Hold on, let's see. Alt and then click, right? And it selects the whole edge. So Alt Shift click, I'm just gonna highlight this entire edge right here. So I have this front face selected, right? So I know this is where my hard edge is gonna be. So this is where I want to cut it, right? So then I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna press Mark Seam. So when I have this marked, right, there's gonna be a orangish reddish line around it, right? So now this is now um, a UV uh, it's now a UV square, right? Or a UV tile. So it doesn't show up, nothing shows up on this grid yet, right? So I'm going to repeat the same thing across the backside, right? I'm going to right click and mark seam. And also here, where it's sharp, and right click and mark seam, right? So now I have this broken up into a few different pieces, right? I have this top piece here, and so wherever you put a cut is where the texture breaks. So what that means is that right now, where you see this entire top piece right here, the texture is going to follow continuously, right? And that may be what you want, but if the square isn't broken up enough, then you'll get distorting. So let's see. Let's try unwrapping this right now. So once you have all the seams marked, you're going to press A to select everything, right? And then you're going to press U, and you can press unwrap. So now I have this unwrapped, right? And you can see that this right here, let's see, let me see if I can select this whole thing. Now you can see this is what this face looks like when it's broken up, right? Or when it's unwrapped, right? So it's trying to be as flat as possible and follow the same form, right? But now it's laid flat instead, so it's a bit more stretched out than you might see here, right? We're flattening it so that we can put a texture on it. So I'm gonna press A again, and you see this top part right here, this is the top of this axe, and this box is this one, right? So it's following all the way through and following all the way through. See, there's no break here. So it's just this one giant strip, right? And you can kind of see it on this piece. So I have a checker tile put it on it already. And you can see at some points it's still distorting a little bit, right? And in this top piece, it's definitely distorting a lot when it comes to this front edge because the tile isn't broken up enough, right? So what I want to do is, let's go into solid mode. I want to break this part up where there's a sharp, right? And you can break it up as however you want. You know, you can put seams here as well, but sometimes it doesn't make sense because you want the texture to be as continuous as possible, right? You wouldn't want the texture to suddenly have a sudden break, right? If you had like a a wood texture, right? It would be very obvious where the wood um, kind of isn't continuous. So I'm going to mark seam on here. So now we have this piece as its own tile, right? So I'm going to press A and then U, unwrap again. So now that's unwrapped, these two pieces are these top pieces, and then this one right here, you can see is just this tiny piece for the front of the blade, right? So we go back to this, and let's see, material preview, still a bit stretched. So what I'm gonna do right now is, if you select these tiles, right, and then you press L, it selects the entire thing, and you can kind of rotate it into place and scale it however you need to. So it looks like maybe it's a bit stretched out um, vertically, so I'm going to stretch it back horizontally, kind of fitting it into this square and lining it up. This is a bit tedious. There are automatic methods to do this, but this is the best method because it's the manual way and you have the most control over how you want your textures, right? Kind of match it up. You don't want any of these to overlap. That's the important part. You don't never have any of these touching because if you have a texture, then it's going to repeat the same exact texture on top of each other, and that is not good. Let's see, where does this square come from? Oh, so this still looks a bit stretched out, so I'm just going to pick this and just scale it a little bit like so. Alright, so the texture looks a bit better, maybe. Just kind of want to match the tile size as well to the rest of this. And now this face seems to, so I can press this and then press L, and it'll select the whole thing. Seems a bit weirdly stretched at some points, like right here, so maybe I want to bring it back like so. Right, okay, pretty good. Alright, so now, oh, these pieces should not be broken up like this, so let's try to bring them back together. We can just merge. Here, let's see, merge. Nope, that's not it. Alright, let me undo some of this real quick. There we go. So we can just select some of these faces and scale them out. So let me find the right face for this. This one. Alright, so this one and this one. These are the two we need to fix. So just gonna pick these two. So let me pick it. And maybe just stretch it out a little bit. But this one, you just want to play around with it. Get the tiling to be as even as possible. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna fix this one too. So you just want to make the tiling, as even as you can. That looks pretty good right now. The back side, you want to do the same. Let's see, it was this one. Scale it like so. Like so. Alright. Close enough. Right. So it's pretty even along this blade, right? Alright, that's looking pretty good. So I'm gonna do the same thing with this handle here, right? Let's hide this. And so with objects like this, it's a bit more tricky because if you have a cylindrical object, then there's gonna have to be a break in the texture at some point, right? Because I want this entire cylinder to be flat, right? So I'm gonna have to put a seam like right down the back side of it, right? And this top piece would be its own UV, and then this bottom piece as well, right? So I'm gonna mark these seams, right? So now this is gonna be its own thing. This is gonna be its own piece, and then this middle cylinder. If you can imagine cutting this middle piece right down this line, and then like kind of pulling it apart and flattening it out. And I'll show you in a second what that looks like. If I press A, U, unwrap, this is what it looks like, right? Uh, So effectively, this line and this line is where this middle seam has been cut, and now it's pulled apart. And now this piece at the bottom is this one, and this top one is this one, right? So we flattened it out. And that looks pretty good, right? Um, so there's a bit of stretching here. It seems to be we might have to break it up a little more, so I'm gonna add another seam here, and now I'm gonna press A, U, unwrap once again, right? So now if I go into material preview, a lot looks a lot better, right? So I press L here. Let's see. So there is an add-on, and I think it still comes with Blender by default, right? It's called UV squares. So to add add-ons, you go to Edit, Preferences, and then under add-ons, you can type in UV squares, right? And I have it enabled by default. So if you type in UV squares, you're gonna see this, right? And I'm gonna click it on, and now you have it installed, right? And if you press N here, it pulls up this side menu, right? And you can see all these things. You can just go straight down to UV squares. And when you have your tile selected and press L, you select the whole thing, and what you can do is press this button to grid by shape, right? Oh, or is it this one? All right, doesn't want to work right now. Let's see. See, not sure why it's not working. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I just have to move it a little bit. So it did work. It's just being weird because I had to move it in order for it to take effect. But now effectively, we've taken that piece and made it a complete square. But you see, there's also the problem of stretching here because this is different, right? So maybe this isn't the best method, right? So I'm gonna let me undo that, and then I'm just gonna manually kind of fit it in, right? So, you know, you can see right here, right down the middle, the texture is breaking apart, right? So, you just have to play around with it. You might have to add a few more cuts where needed, and maybe try doing this again. There we go. Yeah, and then so I'm gonna select these faces here. Okay, so it looks like these have flattened themselves out, which is not good. So UVing is very tricky, right? You're gonna have to play around with this stuff a lot in order to fully understand it, right? So I'm just trying to figure out why it's stretching like this. I think it's because I've made it a square. So converting this into a square kind of messes up some of this. You could also manually pick parts like this, and then you can pick any of these faces, vertices, or edges, right? As you would in edit mode. And then press G, and you can kind of move it, right? So if I move this chunk right here, you can see that I've selected this bottom part, and I'm kind of moving it around, right? So if you press O, right? O is proportional editing. So if you press O and G, you can and scroll your mouse wheel. You can see this little circle. You can see this circle on the other outside, right? And as you're scrolling your mouse, you can control how big the affected area is, right? So if I'm moving this around, if I bring the circle really small, then it's only moving this part. And if I scroll my mouse wheel and make it larger, then I can move more of it, right? So I'm gonna just kind of compress this texture as much as I could. Oh, and it's affecting the other ones. I don't want it to affect the other ones, so let me undo that. Press L. I'm gonna move. Oh, so this is O is on, then it moves everything, right? So I'm just gonna scale this a little bit, move it over, make sure the UVs aren't touching, right? And so certain parts, I just wanna. Okay, so I'm gonna press O again, press G. Let me make the impacted area a little smaller. Maybe I want to move these over. Let's see. Oh, don't want that. So press L. I'm just going to move these over so it's not affected by the proportional editing. Okay, excellent. So press O, and you know it's on when this little circle here is highlighted, right? So I'm going to press G again, and I'm just going to try to fix and line up some of these lines, right? So let's see if I can. So you can see the texture is shifting as I'm moving it. This is looking all right. Looks like this part is a bit um, stretched out as well. You can also hold Alt and select the edge, and then if you press S to scale, right? Well, let me turn off proportional editing. If you do S to scale, and then Y, and then 0. Oh, maybe it's X, 0. Yep. So S to scale along the X axis, and then 0, it straightens the entire UV, the edge that you've selected, right? This is looking all right. You know, it's not the best, and so there's a bit of stretching, but you know, all you have to do is just play around with it. You know, break it up into different ways. Um, so right here we have almost forgot. We have another sharp edge here, so we have to mark this as oh, that's the wrong one. We gotta mark it as a seam. All right. So anywhere you have a sharp edge, you wanna add a seam. It just makes it easier for the texture to kind of make sense of itself because anywhere there's a sharp, that means there's usually a break. So I'm going to unwrap it again. And let's see. Let's go into material preview. All right. So let's try to fix this. So this time I'm going to try this again. All right, that looks a lot better. So let me just scale it down. And then maybe this one. I can do the same without it distorting too much. Nope. Doesn't like to be put into a square. This is more of an organic form, so you know, making it a square kind of doesn't make that much sense. You're just gonna have to manually play around with some of this. All right. So let's see. All right, that looks all right. So let me bring back the axe head. Okay, so this I also want to keep it relatively the same size and kind of following the same flow uh, of squares, right? Looks a bit distorted, so I want to make sure the squares stay square and not just um, become rectangles. So gonna fix some of this. I'm just gonna try to get as square as possible. That looks pretty good. Let's look at this bottom face right here. That looks alright. That's looking pretty good, right? So let's bring the axe head back and we can see it looks pretty even with of squares around the object, right? So this is the original before unwrapping, and this is what it looks like after unwrapping with UV seams. And you can see where the seams are with the orange lines, right? So you can only see it in edit mode though. So edit mode, you can see where all the seams are cut, right? And this is how it's unfolded. All right, so let's fix this because I do not want squares to be overlapping. You never want these squares to be overlapping. You can scale them a little bit if you want, and make sure you're always in material preview so you can see what's happening to your texture, right? You don't want it to suddenly have awkward texturing happening. Just gonna put this in place. On your tile, you want to like give him a good distance. Same thing with this, it looks alright. bit of a distortion here. I kind of not liking this, so I kind of need to fix that. Let's see. Maybe if I scale this edge inward this way. Turn on proportional editing and maybe that'll help. It sucks that you can't see what my keys are in this window. Let's see. Yeah, it's just hard to see what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of editing this so that it doesn't have this weird stretching here. Let's see. Down this way, maybe if I just grab this. Hmm. Alright, not sure why that's happening right now, but not a big deal. Can always make more cuts, make it a little more smooth. It's probably doing this because it's one mesh all the way across, so maybe if you can add another one on the other side right here. So let's see if I right click mark seam and I gotta press A, select everything, U, and then unwrap. So now it should be a little better, but now we gotta fix all of them again. So it's very tedious. You have to keep playing around with it until you get it right. L, just grid by square. I don't know why it's giving me that error, but you just have to move it around. Let's see, maybe this will fix it. So L to select the entire shell, and then to grid by shape, and then press G, and then maybe gotta. Alright, so I shouldn't do that with this one. Maybe I can just flatten the sides. 0. Alright, it's not liking that either. Yeah, this is a weird shape to work with. You're gonna encounter a lot of weird shapes, like so, but this looks alright. It's like keeping its shape. Just gotta scale it a little bit. We gotta look at this back side here this time. So you kind of want to just match it up. Alright, make it a little smaller. Alright, and these I gotta make a little bigger. Go. Just gonna want to match it up with the other one. So it looks pretty even. Smaller, rotate it a bit, make it a little smaller. So control L lets you select similar or like the entire shell in edit mode. All right, that looks fine. So what this is preparing the model for is for an actual texture and not just this checker pattern, right? So the checker pattern is to make sure that there is no stretching and that there's an even distribution of your faces around your object, right? Make sure my recording's still going. Okay. So now I'm gonna apply a texture, right? So I have my model UV'd, and now I want to give it a texture and not actually just have it a checker pattern, right? So up here, we're gonna go to shading, right? So let me get rid of this. And all right. So after you've UV'd your model, right? You're in this shading window, and you have this giant window here, right? So now I'm gonna get into nodes. So what nodes are, right, is a system of mathematical code that's kind of visually done for you. So we're gonna select the object, and then right here we're gonna press new. And by the way, this icon right here, you can see it here as well, is the material icon, right? So you can see the material here is it's gonna be a lot of numbers and a lot of things, and it's gonna look confusing at first, right? But when you add a new material, so let me redo that. So I'm gonna select the object and press new, right? So every time I add a material, it's gonna give it a name, right? So I'm gonna name this axe head, right? So now you can pull up these windows like so and kind of adjust the workspace to how you want it. So with this, these are nodes, right? So if you click on these, you can move them around and they're connected by these, right? So the colors correspond with where you want to where they go, right? So the green one goes into green one, yellow ones go into yellow ones, purple ones go into purple ones, and so on, right? Gray ones go into gray ones usually, right? And then you can play around with it a lot more when you get into it. But here, the main things you want to look at is base color, metallic, roughness, and transmission, right? So base color, so right now we're in solid view mode, right? If you hold Z and you go into material preview, now you can see what the object looks like in material preview mode. So this is your material right now. So it's white right now. You can see where it says base color, right? Now you can change the color with this color wheel to whatever you want. So I'll just make it a red for now, right? Um, so the next most important thing is the metallic. So metallic is how metal looking you want it to be, right? If I want it, so I know this axe is gonna be made of metal, right? So I'm gonna turn it all the way up. Metallic is usually 0 or 1, right? It's either not metallic at all and it's kind of plastic looking, or completely metallic and it's a piece of metal, right? There's really no in between. But you could play around with it and get some interesting effects, right? So I'm going to turn the metallic all the way down for now. Now, roughness is probably your most important thing. So what roughness is how shiny an object is. So the more roughness it has, the less light can bounce off of your object. Let me hide this real quick. The more roughness you have, the less light bounces off your object. The more the I mean, sorry, the more roughness you have, the less light bounces off your object. The less roughness you have, the more light bounces off your object. So now we can see it's reflecting the environment. So if I go shade smooth and then auto smooth, let's see, maybe I can get it to be smooth. There we go. So I can see really glossy looking with no roughness at all. And as I turn this up, you can see it gets more diffused and more diffused, right? Alright, so I'm going to shape flat again. And let's see what else there is. So all these other things are for very specific materials that you're trying to do. Uh, when you want to do specific materials, you can find thousands of Blender tutorials online for shaders. So this is a shader, right? This is what a shader is. And this is the principled BSDF shader. So everything you want to make can be done with this shader. And the transmission is how transparent it is, right? So you can see right through it. It looks like a piece of glass, kind of like a ruby crystal, because it's red. And of course, you can just change the base color, make it a different color. But transmission is how much you can see through it, right? So not at all, and I can see the whole thing. One more interesting one, one of my favorite ones, if you know how to use it correctly in specific cases, is the emission, right? So emission means light. So if I'm turning this up, it becomes kind of white now, right? Because the emission color is white. And as I turn this emission strength up, it starts to kind of glow a bit. So this is a material preview, so it's kind of hard to tell. But if I go into render view mode, um, still kind of hard to tell. Let's see. Can I turn on bloom? There we go. So now the emission is making a piece of the object glow. So now we have a glowing axe head, right? I'm just going to turn that off for now. No emission. Keep it uh, default, right? So now I want to add a material to this, right? I want to add a metallic material. So you can find so to add an actual texture, right? If I want, let's see, let me go on online, right? And I'm gonna look up, uh, one of my favorites is Polygon. And there's a lot of websites for textures that are for free, right? And you can download all these textures online for free and kind of just drag them onto your object, right? So let's see. Let's look for a metal. So looking at the reference, let's see. Let's look at the reference. Back to layout. Hide this cube. So I want to look at the reference image and find a material that's closest to this one. So let's see. This one's pretty close, right? So now when you pick your resolution, it's up to you, but the higher the resolution is, the more it takes up memory. But of course, it also makes it look better. And workflow metalness is fine. This website uses credits, and I'm not signed in right now, so I'm gonna skip this part, and I'm gonna use an add-on that I have that gives me materials for uh, from within Blender. So I'm gonna go over here. So you can find textures online, but this is a add-on called Blender Kit. I'll go more into add-ons in a few weeks, but this is by far my favorite add-on. It does cost money if you want the premium version where you unlock everything that the library has, which I do have, and I think it's definitely worth it. It's like $5 to $7 a month, and you get all these materials inside Blender already. So I'm just gonna type in metal. Of course, you can download these textures for free online as well, but this is just an easy way to do this. So you can see as soon as I just click on the object and I just click the material I want and it drops it in, right? So now if I go back to shading, this is way too complicated, right? But basically all it does is it takes hold on, this is not a good example. Let me undo this. All right. So when you have a material, right? You're gonna have, so let me actually manually do this so I can show you. Let's see, textures. Where can I see free textures? I think there's free. So let me just look up some free textures for Blender. Let's see. Free PBR materials. PBR stands for uh, photo-based realism, something like that. No, photorealistic based render, I think. Uh, where's metallic metals? All right, sure, that looks pretty good. Where can I download it? Let's see. Go. Let me let it download. So this is the manual method of doing this, which is important to know. So I'll just do this manually. Wait for it to download. So this is a 2K resolution, which is good enough for most games, you know. I'm gonna open this. Let's see. All right. So when you download a texture online, right? Let's see. Let me see where I can drop this. Go to here. Maybe make a folder. And then I'm just gonna do metal material. And I'm gonna drag all these into there. So you can see you get a bunch of these maps, right? Um, and according to what it tells you is how you want to plug it into your node network. So you see your principal BSDF shader here. You want to do Shift A. So Shift A adds a node, right? You can press search, or you can go through this menu. You go to texture and then image texture, right? So when you have your image texture here, you can see there's a yellow dot for a color and a base color, right? So you're gonna plug this into here. So there's no image yet, so I'm gonna press open. I'm gonna go to where I put the texture. That's not the one. There we go. All right, and I'm gonna find one that either says base color or albedo. So albedo and base color are the same thing. So this is your base color, right? If I press open, you can see right away, slaps the texture right on, right? So I have a image texture node connected to the base color, right? Now I want to repeat these steps for as many of these textures as I have, right? So you see it says AO, which is ambient occlusion, right? Um, we don't really need that here. It's more for a game engine thing, but we do have metallic, so you can see metallic. So what you can do is actually just drag and click this into your node network, and then connect this. So which one is this? This is the metallic, right? So metallic is gray, so we're gonna connect the gray to the gray, right? So now we can see it has a metallic quality. The thing is, color space, where it says RGB, you want to set it to raw. Anytime you have a texture that doesn't require a color, you can just set it to raw and it'll work a lot better. We have a roughness one, so let me drag this here. The roughness is gray. Put the roughness in. So we're just kind of plugging these in manually. Let's set this to raw. Maybe it'll make a difference. No? Non-color? Alright, doesn't seem to really make a difference, but maybe if I plug the color in. Yeah, okay, so I can see that the roughness one does have some color data. So, you could plug the color one in if it doesn't really look that good and it doesn't work that well. Maybe I should do that for this one too. So you just want to play around with it, see. Sometimes the textures look better when you plug the color in, and sometimes it works better with the raw. Um, let's see which other ones we have. And we have a normal one. All right, so normal. Great. So we actually have to. So you see, there's a purple here, and this is only a yellow or gray, right? So I'm gonna add with Shift a normal node, right? Or oops, I think it's normal map actually. There we go. I'm gonna plug this into the purple into purple, and plug the yellow into yellow. And what normal map does, sometimes it doesn't work that well if you don't set it to the right color mode. Is it gives it fakes the appearance of a of dimension. It fakes dimension basically. So let me shade smooth. Actually, yeah, let me shade smooth. Let me just turn this on real quick. So we can see, let me turn this up a little more. Bit rough. We can see the texture looks pretty realistic, right? It looks like metal. So let me mark these sharp real quick. Have any weird shading errors? So if I'm shading smooth and it looks a bit weird, you can just right click and mark sharp, and now it looks pretty good. And the rest of this can be adjusted so it looks pretty clean across the object, right? You can also turn this strength up, so now you can see where the metal corrodedness is coming through is the fake depth, right? So you can turn it up a little bit more, make it look a little more kind of popping out a little bit with texture, and that looks pretty good, right? Now the front of the blade, I want it to be a different texture, right? Like because in the reference image, let's see, in the reference image, there's kind of a metallic or a shinier piece in the front, right? So I'm gonna do this a kind of a quick and easy way is just select all the faces in the front, go back to your shading, and where you see slot 1, you want to press plus. You can also do this here and just press plus, and you want to add a new material, right? And then assign. So you have these face selected and you're going to press assign. So now this front piece has its own material separate from this one. And you have this stack here that tells you which one's what. You can always go back into edit mode and select and assign, right? So you can also press select and it'll select that material, all the faces that are connected to that material, right? So you can do the same exact thing that you did for this material where you plug all of them in, right? And but for the sake of time and convenience, I will just use my add-on. So add-ons help you a lot with this stuff. You don't have to think too hard about plugging all your textures in. If you have your model UV'd properly, right? Let's see. Created metal. Let's see. All right, it's gonna take a second. It says shader compilation at the bottom. It means it's trying to put the texture on the model. So it'll just take a second, depending on how high quality the model is, and yeah, that looks pretty good, right? I'm gonna shade smooth on this. Let's see, let's mark this sharp. And I'm just gonna slap a wood texture on this. So if your UVs are done well, your textures should have no problem just being plugged in and working. So you can see now the texture looks a little too big and it looks kind of distorted. So you can go back into edit UV editing. Oh, and I see that all of them are overlapping. So I'm going to press unwrap and that looks a little better. I think I'm going to pick a better wood pattern. Let's see, this one looks a bit better. Alright, that's looking pretty good actually. So now you pretty much have your entire model textured, right? Or at least with this method, you just drag and drop materials in, and there you have it. You have a fully textured model ready to be rendered, right? So let me bring back this model right here. Let's see. There we go. So this is the low poly version, right? It's very low and it's very sharp, like sharp, and it kind of uh, doesn't look that great, right? So let's see. Turn this back on, and let's see if I can just copy the UVs. So transfer mesh data. Nope. Mesh data. No, that's not the right one. So a lot of times I think maybe it's the opposite actually. We have to transfer mesh data. Alright, so what I'm trying to do is copy the UVs from here to here, but obviously I've added more cuts here, so it's a bit more difficult to transfer. Um, I'm sure there is a way to transfer it across to your higher poly, um, but you don't necessarily need to have your high poly like subdivided version necessarily UV'd, because you're kind of there's gonna be a process called baking where you can take this and kind of put it on top of this, and it'll turn your low poly to look exactly like your high poly, which I'll go over in another week. But yeah, this week going over subdivision modifier, reviewing that, and going over UVs and how to do them within Blender, and a little bit of texturing. And I'll go over more texturing next week with shading and shading tips and nodes and how to use them properly uh, in the right way. But that's it for me for this week. It was really cool to see all the work you guys have been doing in the Blender Discord. Really inspiring for me to see that you guys are working at this and making things that look really good. And I hope to see you guys next week. So thank you so much for being here once again. and hope to still see what you guys are working on later.